Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Economy and Development Select Committee. This is the first meeting of the new year, so we will be noting the election of the chairman, and then we will move on to appoint a vice chair. Just for the purposes of the live stream, and if we could all introduce ourselves. I'm Hazel, the Scrutiny Manager.
Nicola Perry, Democratic Services Officer.
Councillor Sarah Jones.
Hi there, I'm Mark Hand, Head of Planning.
Ian Saunders, Head of Tourism, Leisure and Culture.
Nicola Edwards, Food and Tourism Strategic Manager.
Mark Howcroft, Assistant Head of Finance.
Dave Evans, Member of Economy and Development.
Bob Hayward, Member of the Economy and Development Committee.
Councillor John Prosser, Member of the Economy Development Committee.
Alan Wintle, a member of the committee.
Susan White, Member of the Economy and Development Committee.
Bob Greenland, Cabinet Responsibility for Innovation, Leisure and Enterprise.
Kelly Byrne, Enterprise. Okay, if we could all remember, please, to turn our mics off when we finish speaking, just to make sure that the camera is on the person that speaks next. Please, can we all ensure that phones are turned off? Pleased to announce that there's been an election for chairman, and Councillor Sarah Jones has been re-elected as the chair of this committee. So we will now move on to the appointment of the vice chairman. Please, can we have some nominations for vice chair of the committee?
Councillor Sue White, would you like to put yourself forward for Vice Chair?
Thank you, Chair.
I'll second that then too.
Councillor Evans has seconded that. Can I have a show of hands then, please? Fantastic. Okay, thank you, Councillor White, appointed as Vice Chair for the committee this year. Okay, we'll move on then to, and thank you, Hazel, for that. We'll move on to agenda item 3, which is apologies of absence.
We received apologies of absence from County Councillor Doug Edwards, and Councillor David Dovey has informed us he's running late, but he will be here shortly.
Thank you, Nicola. Declarations of interest, agenda item 4. As and when. And agenda item 5, which is to confirm and sign the following minutes of our committee meetings, of which we've got 2 sets of minutes. The first set of minutes are from the special meeting that was held on the 30th of March. Unfortunately, I was unable to chair that meeting, and I know Councillor Prosser took that meeting kindly for us. If members then could take us through those minutes, if there are any issues in terms of accuracy or matters arising. No issues? Can I take that then we accept those minutes as they stand?
I'm happy with that, Chair.
Okay. And then the second meeting, which was the ordinary meeting, which was on the 21st of April. First thing I just wanted to note about this is you might see there's a slight change to the way the minutes are being presented to us, and I just wanted to commend Hazel and the team on what I think are a fantastic set of minutes. Really clear. It's great to have a committee conclusion section, which will be used going forward for us now to write to the Cabinet member with an explanation of what's been discussed and what we expect going forward. And also really helpful to have clear actions with the name of the officer that action refers to. So thank you very much for that, and I think that's a really good way for us to move forward in terms of minute taking. But are there any issues in relation to the actual content of the notes? Move? Okay. Great. And we'll move on to agenda item 6. So we now have the action list, which is great to see that this has come forward as well. There are some issues that still are outstanding and which, of course, will remain on that action list and which will need to be followed up by the officers responsible. Are there any comments in relation to that list? Otherwise, we'll move forward and ensure that any actions from today's meeting are also added to that action sheet. Everyone content? Okay. Sorry, Councillor Prosser.
Chair, there is one action there to arrange committee representation on the 106 working group. That needs to be done at a committee meeting, so it doesn't need any further. We need to do it in this committee.
You're correct, and I think that's been raised by another councillor who doesn't sit on this committee for us to follow that up, and that's going to be undertaken today. Are we going to do that towards... Yeah, we'll do that as part of the work programme if that's okay, members, and to follow that action up then. Okay. So moving swiftly on to agenda item 7, which is public open forum, and we've not been notified of any public wishing to speak, and as there are no public here today, we'll move straight on then to the main agenda item 7, which is the revenue and capital budget monitoring. We've got Mark here to present this report to us today, so I'll hand over to you, Mark, before we begin a discussion on this item.
Thank you, Chair. It's a fairly weighty report. I think what I'm going to do, instead of talk to it and use up all your time, is actually talk to the recommendations and then allow you to ask questions about the body of the report that you may have had in reading it. So this is a report that Cabinet saw yesterday afternoon and approved. The outturn position in relation to revenue was a pleasing £31,000 surplus. That's against a budgeted draw upon reserves of 296,000. Now, we don't often use superlatives in accountancy, but I think that's an extraordinary result under the circumstances, because, as the body of the report will say, that's actually afforded about £500,000 of unbudgeted redundancy costs involved in re-engineering of services through the year. It has also accommodated about a similar level of ad hoc savings to compensate for mandated savings that weren't made through the year. So there's about £1 million worth of savings that were made there that drove a £31,000 surplus at the end of the year. The challenge for me going forward with directors is to actually convert some of those ad hoc savings into more permanent savings where the mandated savings are proved to be impractical. Because obviously what I don't want to do is, when we're looking at savings for future years, those end up being double counted when they're already used to subsidise the existing budget position. Yep. We have, as a change from usual, included the earmark reserves position, because I think we're getting to a position now where actually we're at the lower end of the envelope that we set ourselves to. I'm noticing that increasingly there are a number of reports that come through that talk about the use of reserves, and I think it's useful to get members cited on what the level of those absolute balances are. We talk about moving some money between a redundant reserve, single status and equal pay reserve, which will no longer be drawn upon after 4 or 5 years of having that reserve now. And actually we're channeling that into the pension and redundancy reserve and the fixed asset disposal reserve, and expiring the school library deficit reserve. Members may remember that one of the considerations this year was to bring the school library service to a close. That had a deficit balance. Rather than carry that forward on the balance sheet in perpetuity, it was sensible to do a bit of housekeeping in terms of moving some of this money around. Members were asked to approve the redundancy payments identified in 3.16, included within the outturn figures. The reason why it's done like this, there's a bit of a chicken and egg situation here. I mean, obviously service managers understand that in re-engineering their services there will be a degree of heave, and staffing is the main cost that they bear. But obviously at the outset they can't come and say, well, this will be the absolute sum, because that predicates a review process and redeployment opportunity. So it's always done as a two-stage process to that, and agreed subsequently in this fashion. Members consider the position concerning school balances. This was quite a surprise to me at outturn, because all year, last 3 quarters, I've been predicting a use of balances, and actually come out to, and they actually replenish balances to the tune of, they're now proposing to be 1.2 million. So I've looked at that quite closely through the outturn position, and there's a couple of reasons for it, but they all relate predominantly to the improvement grant aspects. You may remember back in October, Welsh Government said that they had to take money out of the improvement grant within year. The reaction of schools is that, well, they couldn't change their programmes necessarily at that date, so they felt it was going to affect their balances more often than not. That hasn't manifested it in that fashion, because the Pan Gwent LEAs and the EAS has worked hard to absorb that within either the EAS's funding or within the reserves that were held for EAS purposes. So to a large extent, the effect on individual schools has been mitigated. But there was another aspect to this that proved quite telling, was that the administration around their grant funding isn't perhaps as robust as it could be. They presume their grant funding will be spent every year, and yet their costs will be incurred on their general school budget, so there's a degree of double counting there that me and the finance manager in CYP are going to try to work through to see whether there's a better way of reporting that more collective position to avoid that double counting. But overall, it's a generally good position in terms of replenishment of balances. The detail of the report explains that we started the year with 6 schools in a deficit position. We finished the year with 5. And actually those that are repaying at a faster rate than initially supposed. So that's a good result. Mandated savings deliveries. This appears in the quarterly report in terms of progress. There's not been a great change since month 9. It does mean that £100,000 worth of savings have been delayed, and £370,000 felt not appropriate to make. As I mentioned in my preamble, my challenge now is to convert some of the ad hoc savings they have made to compensate for not making those in the fashions that described into the formal savings, and those will be reported back to members because obviously members initially approved the original mandates going forward. The capital position was a big part of month 9, and what we did was we highlighted the fact that there'd be no automatic right to slippage, that Cabinet had previously approved a position that anything that appeared in the capital programme either had to displace something else or had to pay for itself. In displacing something else, it's sensible to look more cathartically at which projects are going forward, whether they still have a strategic relevance to the organisation. And at outturn, there was headroom in the programme to avoid the additional commitments for next year without actually top slicing some of the existing property maintenance and farm maintenance budgets. So that's a good result as well. The slippage schedule is included in 2.8 to give you an idea of what we are slipping forward and what we have decided not to recommend to Cabinet. The capital financing position is shown in the report largely because members have subscribed to the 21st Century School Initiative that requires substantial use of capital receipts. I think it's important to keep on members' radar where we are with that consideration. Clearly, we don't need all those receipts now when we haven't got them banked. That profile of expenditure is over the next 5 years. So where it will manifest itself is if we don't generate sufficient receipts when we need them, there will be need for temporary borrowing, which makes the exercise a little more expensive than it would ordinarily be. So that's why we keep an eye on that. And then the last recommendation was to consider the underspend of the capital outturn to actually fund the capital priorities identified in 3.56 going forward rather than top slicing existing resources. And I'm happy to take any questions at that point.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Members, do we have any questions then for Mark in relation to this report? I know there were some particular issues around redundancy, so perhaps we might want to explore those issues now. Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks to the report, Mark. The report, I think, is very clear and I think is laid out quite well. I did say in the pre-meeting, I am very disappointed, though, that we don't get paper copies. I brought it up time and time again. I know we're in a paperless society, but when you have, as you put it, you called it a weighty report, was the very first sentence you used. When you have a report like this with so many figures in, that you need to flip back and forth, and in the recommendations it says you must look at clause 315 and this sort of thing. It's very difficult on the screen, and it would help tremendously if we had a paper copy. I'm not saying we want a paper copy of everything, but when we have financial reports, budget reports, I think we need a paper copy. If it's not posted, it could easily be printed and put in the members' rooms, in their lockers, so that they can take them back. So I know that I haven't read the report and given it the interest that it deserves in here. There's a lot of figures in here, and it's obviously a very important report as far as the authority is concerned. So I'd ask Democratic Services in particular to try and make that as a point that when we have financial figures, can we have a paper report, please? I've got one or two questions, just questions on process. In the single status and equal pay reserve, I think it's quite right that we get rid of that reserve now. I'm surprised we haven't got rid of it before. What I don't understand is why we're taking one earmarked reserve and then splitting it into 3 earmarked reserves. I would have thought that the correct process should have been that that reserve should have been wound up and the money go into general reserves, and then cabinet papers brought forward for members for money from the general reserve to go into earmarked reserves for the 3 reserves that you want here. So the school library reserve. Now the school library reserve has got absolutely nothing to do with single status and equal pay reserve. And it just seems to me peculiar that we're splitting one earmarked reserve up into 3 other earmarked reserves. Why doesn't it go into general reserve and the money come out from that? If we just address that one first.
I think the effect would be the same. I mean,
The effect will be the same, but it's
ultimately the head of finance has a delegation to be able to do this, so you wouldn't generally put it into general reserves to make that decision of cabinet or council. The expiry of a deficit reserve, well, it is a sensible one. The consideration to put it into redundancy and pension reserves, we recognise where our pressures are coming from in terms of being able to re-engineer services. The large part of our services are facilitated by staff. They're the main costs that local authorities face. It just seems entirely prudent to move that there under those circumstances.
I'm not arguing with that. What I'm saying is the process. We're the Economy and Development Committee. Why are we making judgments or comments on developing a reserve for the school library reserve? That should be another scrutiny committee. And I'm saying by lumping it all together and changing one earmarked reserve into another earmarked reserve, you're actually not corrupting, but you're confusing the process on the scrutiny committees and member involvement, etc., etc. Whereas whoever deals with the single status and equal pay reserve, that committee should wind it up, and then it should be another committee makes a request for an earmarked reserve for their portfolio.
My stance to the report is that all committees get effectively the same report the Cabinet sees, so that you're all briefed in a holistic nature about the finance of the Council. And then there are special appendices, i.e. Appendix 5, which refer to the enterprise and economy and development section. I think I'm hung for a sheep or for a lamb. If I move that without explaining it to members, then you will probably have equal concern.
Okay. Right. If we go into the report in general, then you've got a lot of detail there about the savings that have made, and obviously our part, the enterprise and operations, had made significant savings. And yet, if you look at the table in paragraph 316, you'll see that those savings have actually come with a cost, and there have been £572,000 worth of redundancies within that directorate. Now, again, when those, we're only in month June, when those savings were forecast, it must have been known that those savings would come with a cost. And I presume that the cost of the savings, the cost of the redundancies to make the savings, was factored into the savings themselves. Now, again, the report doesn't look that clear when you say that the enterprise section has made savings of £600,000 or whatever it is. I can't remember the exact figure, but that's come with a cost of £572,000 redundancy. The net savings are obviously not those forecast in the mandate. Now, I did see a paper, I can't remember whether it came to this committee or to audit committee, where we talked about payback periods and when we saw the benefit of this. That doesn't appear in this report, or at least I couldn't find it in the report. But it does seem to be slightly misleading when we're forecasting significant savings, and then you've got to go to another part of the report to find there's also significant costs associated with those savings.
The 572 that you talk about is the council as a whole. In enterprise, there's £59,000 worth of redundancies that were reserve funding that would have been subject to a specific report. There's only 165 that relate to a caveated use of reserves. The approach that the Council adopts with this is that it immediately takes its savings from any mandates, so that the budgets are adjusted. The expectation is that unless a specific use of reserve is sought by Cabinet, that through the year the service will make compensatory savings to try to mitigate the effect on reserves by the end of the year. So they're not netted off in the fashion that you describe in the mandates. The presumption isn't that officers know what the cost of the redundancy is at the time that they put the proposals together. They have a good idea, but as I mentioned earlier, that they don't specifically know which individuals will be affected to be able to ask for a precise amount from reserves.
So why then, if you look at the third column there, approval required, are you asking this committee to approve £432,000 worth of spending if that was in the original mandates? You know, if you're saying it was all in the original mandates except for the reserve funding, which is the central column, why are we being asked to approve 432,000 of redundancy costs?
Right. This was a report that Cabinet saw, and it would have been Cabinet that would have approved the funding. It's not that it's included in the mandate. The redundancy costs associated with mandates are not a net figure. They're a gross saving.
Councillor Hayward, should I ask Kelly to...
Well, recommendation 2.3 says members agree to review the earmarked reserve, so we are being asked to approve it. Recommendation 2.3, yeah.
Did you want to come in on this, Kelly? I know you were...
If I could, please, Chair. Just to clarify that in terms of the redundancy costs for enterprise and the call on reserve that we've made for those costs and those to be covered is the £59,000 amount that Mark previously mentioned. So the figure for enterprise isn't 572, that's the authority-wide figure. Because as you know, and as we've debated quite significantly in the past, the emphasis that we try to bring to bear as a directorate is on income generation. And that's been where the majority of our savings have been able to be made through generating surplus incomes. So wherever possible, we've tried not to cut or to make savings, albeit there has to be some of that as part of our processes. But I suppose my contribution today was just about recognising that, really. There's over £1.3 million worth of benefit derived by enterprise over the last 12 months, which is achieving, I think, nearly 97% of the total amount that we were set out to achieve. And I think, Mark, as well, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that's nearly 27% of the entire amount required across the authority, which is quite a significant contribution when you look at the size and scale of our budget comparatively. So it is an excellent outcome. In particular, I think, Ian's team, Leisure, they've done a remarkable job generating additional revenue when you consider they also put on 7 major cycling events and generated huge returns on investment to the local economies. I think the work done in estates as well has been quite significant because obviously they're responsible for bringing in huge amounts of money in terms of capital receipts and revenue rental generation. Housing has done a fantastic job as well, because obviously the model of conjoining services with Torvine is starting to pay dividends. And we've seen some great gains in IT as well, which is an area that you've looked at intensively as a committee. And I think we've seen an increased push on efficiencies and income generation there as well. So from my part, yes, I accept the question about redundancies, but it's a very small figure for enterprise. We've really tried to put the push on income over the last 12 months, and I think you can see that in the result that I'm very proud to present today.
Councillor Greenland.
Just to pick up on the point about Councillor Hayward said that you are being asked in 2.3 to agree the earmarked reserves. This is actually word for word the Cabinet report that went to Cabinet yesterday. And it is for Cabinet to agree that review. And it's just been badged, obviously, this morning as the Economy and Development Select Committee.
Yeah, I think, can we agree that then, Mark, that the recommendations in this paper are not for us as a committee and not relevant to our committee to recommend? Our role here today is to scrutinise the ongoing finances within this report, but it's not to approve or otherwise the recommendations, because that's a Cabinet function that's already gone to Cabinet yesterday.
The responsibility of all four selects is to review the monitoring process.
So not to approve or otherwise the recommendations. So, yeah, okay. Councillor Hayward, did you... Oh, sorry, Councillor Green, and then...
Actually, just to go back to the very first point that Councillor Hayward made about paperless meetings, it is true that we have moved to paperless meetings, but for any member that wishes to, they can print off their own copy of the agendas if they wish. There's a printer outside the room. Each member has the ability to, well, each member has the facility to do that. And if they wish, they can also go to a member of Democratic Services and ask them to print off a copy for them.
I think in the interest of fairness then on that item, and that specific item, is that we'll ask Democratic Services Committee to look at this, because if it's an issue amongst all the committees, then I think it needs to be reviewed in terms of the corporate position potentially. So we'll ask Democratic Services to take that on. I'll just check, Councillor Hayward, did you have anything further? And then I'm going to move to Councillor Prosser for further.
No, sorry, Chair, I was under the apprehension that it was pre-decision scrutiny, but it's obviously just an information paper, so I didn't understand.
Councillor Prosser?
Thank you, Chair. I think it would be useful for members and for the public at large if on the agenda, we did say in the agenda, like item 7, it just says revenue and capital budget monitoring. What should be there is to review the revenue, you know, what's the action? Because earlier on in the agenda, you say things like to confirm the minutes, to note the action list. Well, I think we need to have some direction on the agenda that says something like to review the process, you know, exactly as Mark said, so that our remit is quite clear to us and to the public in general. So we just could add that, it would help matters, I feel.
I think that's a very fair point, particularly in relation to what the public, if they pick up this paper, they're not clear on what we're being asked to do as a committee, in addition to us. So, Councillor Wintle.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question I ask you, I've been asking you a year or so now, since you've been here, Mark, about children and young people's redundancy costs. I know it's not normally our remit, but overall, we're taking money out of reserves again, the council reserves, and the schools are only paying 91%, 91,000 out of it. Is it possible for us to have a breakdown of the redundancies by age? We don't want to know any names, not necessarily the schools, but it seems that this is happening every year, and I think it's something we should get to grips with and stop, because you know, what, 300,000 is a lot of money in anybody's terms, and I think it could be better used.
Can I just provide a point of clarification? The situation in regard to schools redundancies is slightly different from the rest of the council. Children and Young People Directorate have a £300,000 budget annually to afford those costs. Any extra over and above that 300,000 is distributed back to schools to pay for. So there is no use of reserves no use of general reserves by schools to afford their redundancy costs.
Kelly?
Yeah, if I can just add to that, please, Chair, and just to sort of back up Mark, really, our contribution to schools-based severance is a statutory requirement. We have to do that, and that's why that reserve is established annually to contribute to those costs otherwise borne by children and young people. And I mentioned yesterday at Cabinet that Peter Davis is doing a paper to the next audit committee that will break down redundancy costs by area, so you can see those in a very comprehensive context. So you'll see them by directorate, you'll see the amounts, but obviously, as you've said, Councillor Winton, we can't divulge personal details, but you will have a full breakdown for that meeting.
Members, any other questions? I've got a couple of questions around just some of the specifics in here, and I suppose it's more directed towards Kelly. Often we're seeing increasingly issues around the budget, which are around Caldecott Castle and tourism budget. Just really a reassurance. I think we've got a review of cultural services coming forward, and I think now more than ever we need to ensure that we're on top of this area, because this is a prevalent issue within these budget reports. Is that something that's coming forward shortly?
Yeah, absolutely. The review is ongoing at the moment, and you may be aware, members, that public consultation engagement sessions have been staged in your localities, and I'm sure you've had the opportunity to contribute to those. We call this tourism, and it looks like our tourism budget is massively overspending, and it's not. But when we say tourism, we include obviously some of the tourism attractions within that. So it's not Nicola's core budget so much, it's the wider budget that we have to run those attractions. What I would say about Caldecott Castle and Country Park in particular, though, is that over the last 12 to 18 months, we've really made sustained efforts to try and breathe new life into Caldecott Castle, and I think local members will attest to that. The odd thing is that last year we generated more income and profit than ever at Caldecott Castle. It's just our income targets are so high, we're constantly sort of undershooting them, if you like. Those income targets increase every year with fees and charges. So we are sort of undershooting them at the moment, but we are generating income and profit, just really not enough. And I think that really does call into question, the short-term viability, and that's exactly why we're doing this cultural services review. And I think a special meeting is in the process of being arranged of this committee, so we can come and present some of those findings to you comprehensively, and you can be part of that process then that informs the future position that we have to take on those things.
Great. Okay, and then just more widely, I mean, there's obviously some good progress, 97% progress against the budget mandates we've set ourselves as a directorate. But can I just out of interest, what proportion of your directorate makes up the savings in comparison to other directorates? And what potential is there? I mean, just looking further ahead at the obvious cuts that are going to be coming further down the line, how much more can we cut within this department? I think we're moving more towards income generation, which seems to have been really successful. But what are your just sort of general thoughts in terms of your directorate?
It's a lot. We contribute, I think, quite a lot. I think it is about 27% from memory, Mark. But again, we're trying desperately not to cut. We are trying to look at an alternative around income generation, new revenue generation, looking more in innovative methods and incorporating those into service delivery. And I think the future can be one of growth and investment and new prosperity. But to achieve that, we will almost certainly have to look at new delivery and development models. Some of those things may not be able to remain in-house, because you're right, we've probably maxed out, the real opportunities for income. And perhaps we need to put those into different contexts in the future to enable them to go even further.
Thanks, Kelly. A quarter. Okay, thank you. Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Chair. Just forgetting the revenue, just one question on the capital position, and it's something I brought up over the last several years, and that's the amount of slippage that we have in our capital programme. And the report makes it quite clear that obviously officers and the Cabinet are concerned about the amount of slippage. But what's worrying is we don't seem to get to grips with what's causing the slippage. It's in the report, there's something about at month 9 we were forecasting that we would complete £7.5 million worth of work, and we actually only completed £3.5 million. So the forecasts, just 3 months before the end of the year, were 100% out of what actually happened. Now, do we have any information on whether this slippage is caused by difficulties in the planning process? I know we have Mr. Hanger, so I can ask that question. Or is it because the contractors that we're employing are not performing as they should do? So whose fault is the slippage? Is it the councils or the contractors? Thank you.
I don't think there's any one panacea reason why that's the case. Each individual project is slightly different. What I have noticed is that we tend to spend or get our projects going in the autumn, over the summer into the autumn and winter. That doesn't strike me as the most sensible time to organise works, because you're then suffer with the vagaries of the weather. Although this June hasn't exactly been a summer that we were all anticipating. So I think there are planning implications. I think there are also capacity issues in terms of managers managing revenue and capital, managers realising revenue savings. What I was trying to do in terms of the discipline attached to slippage was that change a bit of a culture that says that, well, actually it's okay for these things to take multiple years. More than ever, I wanted people to appreciate that actually if you're commended resources in any one year, that you actually ought to resolve that in that particular year. So I actually think the emphasis that people appreciate that actually there's a chance that they will lose those resources that they have sought will be quite powerful in terms of changing that dimension. But it's not changed overnight. I mean, you mentioned that you've been talking about it for a number of years. It's done by degrees. I think the situation this year is better than it was last year, and I anticipate next year's slippage position to be even better again.
If I could just come back on that, Chair. It sounds a very good answer, but I'm not sure I believe it. Sorry, Mark. And the reason I don't is 2 or 3 years ago I was given the excuse that when people programme, it's natural instinct that you programme at the beginning of the year. So if you're going to achieve £5 million worth of capital savings and people prepare a programme, they say, oh, well, it's optimistic, we'll try and do this in the first 3 months of the year, and there's a natural slippage through. And I had a commitment at that time that, no, they would look at that and look at programmes reasonably, and if the capital expenditure wasn't going to be spent until the last 3 months, it would be programmed the last 3 months. In other words, we were going to get our programme in far more accurately here. But remember that a large part of our capital spending is on schools. We've got this commitment to 21st century schools. Those are generally big projects. And it's not a case of officers perhaps not knowing. I mean, a project of that size, the building of Caldecott School, for instance, must be taking up a lot of officer time. We have officers purely dedicated to the one project. We need to understand why those are being slipped. Is it because there's bad ground conditions which are likely to incur extra costs? Is it because it takes longer to design? Or is it because we have too much consultation? Or is it simply because it takes so long to get through the planning process? We need to understand the reason, because slippage is important. It affects the cash flow. It possibly deprives other projects of not being done because we're saying we're going to prioritise schools, and yet if we're not spending the money on schools, it means there's valuable capital projects which we could be getting a benefit from, which we're not undertaking because we're allocating the money, and all the money is doing is sitting in the bank. So it is important that we understand why the slippage occurs.
Absolutely, and that's why I'm suggesting the changes that I have done over the last couple of months in terms of the importance of slippage and slippage considerations. In terms of the 21st century schools, single biggest capital projects that are going to face our capital programme over the next 5 years. As a consequence of which, there's a degree of checks and balances that go alongside that. We were anticipating to get approval to start putting a spade in the ground for those projects last October. WG, who are providing half the money for this, have recently signed those off now in terms of full business cases. Therefore, whilst we anticipated some spend last year, it didn't occur for all reasons that were outside of our control. I think the issues of planning, I think the issues of building on floodplains, I think consultation, all have a manifest consideration to projects. I couldn't perceive that any one particular item is compromising the delivery of them. I think it's a multitude of things, and the bigger the projects, the greater the magnitude of problems.
I'll just go to Kelly, and then if Councillor Hayward wants to follow up, and then to Councillor White.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up Mark's comments, Chair, really, and say I don't think there is a silver bullet. I mean, I think there are so many reasons and issues that sort of underpin this. But just from a planning perspective, you know, there isn't anything that really springs to mind in terms of planning delays or hurdles at the moment. Yes, some of those things that Mark spoke about in terms of natural resources, Wales, flooding issues, landscape, biodiversity, ecology, they're all factors. and there have to be material considerations, but there's nothing in the planning process per se that would hold some of these things up. I do think, however, that you are right, Councillor Hayward. We've got to be quite self-aware about this. There are some external factors that we can't control, but there are some internal factors that we can. And one of the issues is sometimes we are both acting as a client and a contractor. So if you think about the council's role in commissioning services and the council's role in providing those, and property services is a case in point. Sometimes there can be issues there, and I think we have to be upfront about acknowledging those, maybe in terms of capacity, skills, expertise. And one of the things that we're certainly looking to advocate now over the next few months is a business review of property services to ensure that when we do commission things via the council, so they are leading in terms of being the contractor or the supplier, if you like, that those things are value for money, they are well timed, and we get the product and the outcome that we really need.
I think we might have an item on that coming forward on the 23rd of July. I think that's the date we've got set. So, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. From a planning point of view, I can't comment in too great a detail. I've got meetings booked this afternoon and tomorrow to talk about one of the infrastructure projects in particular. But I'm happy to report back to this committee or another forum as appropriate to provide an update. However, in my limited time here so far, the issues around Monmouth Comp have been raised with me by several parties, so that's an urgent priority on my list. But equally, I know that the new school at Caldecott seemed to fly through the planning process very smoothly and quickly. So, as Kelly mentions, I don't think it's an inherent problem with the planning process. There's more some site specifics. So, in particular with Monmouth Comp, I know there's been a holding objection from Natural Resources Wales with issues to be ironed out. But once I've had those meetings, Chair, I'm more than happy to report back to this forum or another forum.
Councillor Hayward, any follow-up? Or?
No, I think so.
Okay, members, any further questions regarding this report? Okay, I'll just briefly summarise them because we're not looking at the recommendations. We're going to just summarise to note our comments as a committee then. So Councillor Hayward talked about the process and why we've taken one earmark reserve and split it into three, and detail around the savings. Also mentioned around the report itself in terms of a paper copy, and that should go to Democratic Services to review. Councillor Prosser mentioned about we should include information such as to review under the agenda item to be clear for us and for members of the public as the direction of that agenda item. Councillor Winter talked about children and young people's redundancy costs and possibility of having a breakdown of redundancies by age and getting to grips with that issue specifically. I mentioned about the tourism issues around the cultural review, which is coming forward to a special meeting, and the quantity of savings that are being made from this directorate specifically. And Councillor Hayward has finished with a discussion around the slippage issues and where the fault lies for that. And we've heard that we'll have a report back from Mark regarding some of those issues themselves. So if members are content with that report as it stands now, we'll move on to the following item. Okay. So our next agenda item is agenda item 8, which is a planning and development tourism discussion. This is a follow-on from the meeting that was held on the 30th of March, which I wasn't actually in attendance at, but we had the tourism workshop. Thank you, Mark. Sorry. Thank you very much for presenting to us. We had a discussion around tourism opportunities, and there were some issues and gaps regarding the planning process, we believe, and the ability for us to be able to regenerate in relation to tourism development. And as such, we brought the two departments together today. The report that you've got in front of you today is not for us to scrutinise as a committee, it's for background information to give us some direction to why we've brought these two directorates together. And I'll possibly ask Ian then to take us forward now and to outline what your expectations are from us as a committee today and what we can do to help and support this process.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. It's fair to say that the debate and the discussion we had at the workshop about the destination plan going forward was really, really valuable. And there were some really key points that were drawn out of that. We've got it's a critical time really for our development as a tourism department, and I think there's some challenges to growth, and I think it's really relative that this scrutiny committee helps us to work through some of those challenges because we've got so many opportunities. I explained at the workshop about the changes in regional tourism and the City Region Group, the South East Wales Tourism Forum, and also the Destination Management Group, which reach regularly under SUDERG. So there's a lot of bigger projects and opportunities that we see that we definitely want to be on the front foot with. We've also got to review what we've done, the key programs that we've delivered through our Destination Management Plan over the past 4 years. And also put that into context with our STEAM performance figures that Nicola and the team are doing at present. One of the big factors that came out from I think Hotel Solutions did this piece of work, and on reading it and looking at the recommendations in the report, there are some really valid points there that we really need to look at in more detail and better understand. It's a piece of work that Kelly, myself and others in Enterprise, including Mark, obviously new into Post, are taking up that challenge and looking at how we can take context of this report and move forward to make sure that we are growing our STEAM figures. Nicola has done a piece of work now linked to the Welsh Partnership for Growth, the strategy for Wales, and I think you're going to do a presentation now on some of the problems and issues that Nicola is up against when she has tried to put forward some issues in the past. So I think I'll hand over to Nick, and obviously you're going to go through that, Nick, and show some of the issues there. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Chair. What I plan to do, if it's okay with members, is just to give a brief overview of our headline STEAM figures for 2014, which we received last week, and to show you, amongst some of the tourism performance trends over the past few years, how the particular planning policy framework that we've got is impacting on our ability to grow tourism. So if it's okay with members, I'd like to share that with you, and also to give Mark, our new head of planning, some context for the discussions that we've been having. So, oh, excellent, it works. Thank you. Like by magic. Okay, so this is just looking at, as I say, some of the challenges to tourism performance and growth. These are the headline figures for 2014. As you can see, the headline figures are all positive. They're showing growth, 2.1% in real terms for economic impact. All of those performance indicators are moving in the right direction. I will share the report, the full report, which is full of tables and explanations with you. Unfortunately, we didn't receive the report in time to share that with you for this meeting, but I will do after. So if we look at the key destination performance trends for economic impact, you can see that since 2003, that trend is positive. We had a blip in 2012, which was due to very bad weather conditions in 2012, and we had peaks in 2011 and 2008. But generally, that trend is positive. The same goes for visitor numbers, visitor days, and FTEs, not such a positive trend, still a positive trend, but you'll see that the growth is not as increasing as greatly as it is for economic impact. And so I will explain some of the reasons for that when we look at our bed stock. If we look at the sectoral distribution of revenue and full-time equivalent jobs, you can see on the left-hand side, the blue diagram shows how the benefits of revenue are distributed amongst the different sectors. The indirect expenditure figure there that you can see of 24%, that's the multiplier effect. So that's businesses servicing the tourism industry, so for laundry companies, gardening services, etc. You can see that the single most important segment is accommodation. That's where the most of the revenue is being generated. If you look at the full-time equivalent jobs on the right-hand side diagram, you will see that 32% of the FTEs are in the accommodation sector. So if you look at the distribution of economic impact by visitor type, then the yellow, and I'm not sure how well you can see the figures on here, but hopefully you can see the size of the segments. The yellow segment is day visitors. So you can see that 29% of the economic impact is from day visitors. 71% is from staying visitors. If you look at how that 71% of staying visitor benefit is broken up, you can see that 38% of that is in the service sector, 22% of that is in the non-service sector, and 11% of that, SFR, is staying with friends and relatives. So you can see that in terms of revenue, staying visitors and serviced accommodation particularly bring the greatest economic benefits to the locality. If you look at the jobs, similarly, you can see that 77% of the jobs are the result of staying visitors. 23% of the full-time equivalent jobs are in the day visitor market. Of the 77% that are due to staying visitors, 39% are due in the serviced accommodation sector, 28% in the non-serviced accommodation. And bear in mind that our accommodation profile is 60% non-serviced and 40% serviced. So even though there's far fewer bed spaces in the service sector, we're still generating the most benefits from the serviced accommodation sector. This shows our accommodation profile for visitor accommodation. The table at the bottom shows you the split, which is between 40% in 40% split in serviced accommodation, 60% non-serviced. If you look at the second table, 70% of that non-serviced accommodation is in the caravan and camping sector. And what that means is that when the weather is poor, that our economy is not resilient, and that's why we had the results that we did in 2012, and that's why we're struggling to really grow our tourism at a comparable rate with local authorities neighbouring us who have more serviced accommodation. This particularly shows some of the issues that we're facing. On here you can see the dark green colour is the non-serviced accommodation, the paler green colour is the serviced accommodation, and it shows the availability of bed supply throughout the year. Now, if you look at the difference between January and June for non-serviced accommodation, you will see that there are 2,000 less bed spaces in January, February and December than there are in the middle of the year. And that is why our profile of performance looks like this over the course of the year. And no matter what we do, we struggle to change that. Simply because of the high amount or the disproportionate amount of non-serviced accommodation that we've got, and the high percentage of that's in the caravan and camping sector. And the particular planning policies that impact on this in the fact that it's very, that for example, our new glamping sites are being asked through planning conditions to take down their units over the winter period, so they are unable to extend the season. We're also struggling to develop facilities on camping and caravan sites which would enable those operators to extend the season and meet demand for off-peak visits. And the other thing is that we just simply do not have the number of bed spaces over the off-peak season that we do in the peak season. But if we want to develop jobs that are year-round and an industry that's year-round, then we've got to be creating that demand and be able to meet that capacity in terms of accommodation and particularly in terms of service. Where it says Series 1, Series 2, Series here, that is actually 2012, 2013 and 2014. I struggled with the graph getting the figures on, and these were just some pretty pictures to break up my presentation a bit, but this is just some lovely accommodation that we've got in our area that is really it's really first class, and we're very proud of it. So this is a 5-star self-catering cottage in Tintern, opposite Tintern Abbey. This performs extremely well. It's developed and refurbished to meet the particular demands of its market. This is a new site that we've got, Penheim Glamping, which again is a fabulous site. Really high demand for this type of accommodation and this type of break, which allows people to not only staying accommodation which is a bit out of the ordinary and unique, but helps them feel closer to nature, and that is something that we do extremely well in Monmouthshire. This is a newly refurbished bedroom of the renamed Crown at Whitebrook, which is now called the Whitebrook Michelin Star, which has just undergone a full refurbishment. And this is one of their lovely bedrooms. So back to numbers. This is just again showing you how the different sectors have performed in recent years. So on the left is serviced accommodation performance, and with their years on the right, non-serviced accommodation performance. And as you can see, as I've been reporting to this committee every year, non-serviced accommodation is really struggling. And it's been struggling. Well, we had a good year in 2011, but that was a bumper tourism year for Wales. So since 2011, in 2012, we had minus 14% growth in our non-service sector. 2013, minus 5.1%, and this for 2014, minus 2.9%, compared with over the same period, for 2012, which was an awful year, we had 1.1% growth for serviced. 2013, we had 11% growth for serviced, and this year we've had 10.8% growth for serviced. So in terms of, you were sent the Accommodation Development Opportunities Report, and here is just a list of some of the particular development opportunities that were identified in there. I won't go through them all because I'm assuming you've seen the report, and I don't need to do that. And the same report identifies these as particular issues with the existing planning policies. Now, it should be said that these were obviously identified at the time that the report was written, which was 2013. And Mark may, have some news that some of these things are no longer such an issue for us. So that's the end of my background presentation, and unless there are any questions.
I've just got a question. I mean, we've got some really useful data in there. Do we have any qualitative type feedback from, for example, events where we've been able to get sort of quite large-scale feedback in relation to visitor experience in relation to our accommodation offer? So, for example, of the cycling events, do we get feedback from the organisers about the ability for us to house, if you like, those people that are coming to the county for these large-scale events?
We certainly know from our TICs the feedback that we have that we struggle to meet demand for serviced accommodation, and we end up referring people out of county if they want a particular type of accommodation.
Okay, I thought that would be the case. And just one other quick question. Do we have a comparative, I mean, we talk a lot about our ability in comparison to our neighbouring or similar type local authorities. Have we got a comparative, a statistical comparative, which shows, and possibly linking that to their own LDP or UDP, whatever their planning policy is? Is there anything that's given us that comparative study?
We will receive comparative data, or it'll only be headline results for all the authorities in Wales, but that hasn't yet been received. So that will come once all the local authorities have received their STEAM results. And we are generally one of the first to receive ours because we make sure that we get all our data in quite quickly.
So we could have that information
Yes,
come back at a later point.
certainly,
maybe just
yes,
put that on
definitely.
there.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, members, Councillor Prosser.
Yes, thank you for that. I must admit, the first part, I couldn't see any of the figures or words, so I had to listen to what you were saying. Basically, a lot of statistics, a lot of background information, it's a lot of sort of consideration of what's happened in the past and where are we and how do we compare with others. Okay, take that said, as a tourism initiative, I would say we want more tourists, we want more jobs, right? So if I was to say, let's double the amount of tourism in Monmouthshire, big task, let's double it, right? You're going to say, oh, we can't do that because, and there's certain barriers, and you've mentioned some of the barriers today, right? My question is, well, what are you going to do to get towards that doubling of the tourism? How are you going to remove those barriers as officers? How are you going to get there? What tools do you need to get there? Is the way I'm trying to crystallise everything you've said today, but I'm trying to get to the bottom line. So, I mean, you've mentioned some planning. You mentioned one about glamping, and they're told to take their tents down. Why? Is it national statute that says you can't do that? Or is it flexible so we can just remove that qualification and get on with it? You know, so I know you'd have to look at the background. It may have implications on the wherever it is and the reasons. But what are the reasons? And is it just because somebody said sometime we have to do it, we do it? You know, so those sorts of questions need to be answered, and you need to get forward to that. But I'd like to know, in one phrase, if you like, or a couple of lines, what are the main barriers stopping you doubling tourism in Monmouthshire? What are the barriers? How do we remove those barriers?
I think, Nicola, you might want to respond, but I think Mark wants to come in on a response to this as well. And I think that's the purpose of today, because that's exactly it. We need to understand what these barriers are and how we're going to take this forward as a council and as joint working between directorates or between areas. So, Nicola, did you want to follow it first, and then I'll move to Mark?
Yes, certainly. In terms of the glamping question particularly, the taking down of the unit is a planning condition of the approved permission, but it's not just has the effect on our ability to provide more bed spaces. It also impacts on the business to be financially viable, because the cost of taking them down and putting them back up at the beginning of next season is a really significant financial.
Could I come in there? You say it's a planning condition. Why is it a planning condition? That's my question. I understand the repercussions. Why is it in there? Is it purely because the planning committee decided so? Is it purely because the planning department decided so? Or is it a national requirement that you must do that?
Chair, the short answer is that it comes from getting the scheme to comply with the LDP, with the policies we have in place. So it's something within our gift. It's something that we could perhaps look at changing. But in a nutshell, the policies that we have are supportive of more small-scale and informal tourism, camping, touring caravans. When we get on to things like glamping, there isn't a specific policy. And it starts, if it's there all year round, it falls into becoming permanent development, and you end up with a policy presumption against. So it's almost a kind of a newish area of tourism, that there's a gap in the LDP, and I think inadvertently it's caught by restrictive policies that try deliberately to capture other development. So the condition, my understanding is, was a way of being helpful in as much as it meant it could be approved, albeit, not year round. Otherwise, the policies are against it at the moment. So I understand this is the start of a series of sessions and work. So this is where we can really look at the policies. And perhaps for a future meeting, I can set out a bit of a list of the relevant LDP policies and how they tie together, and where they are permissive or not permissive. I don't fully know the background yet. That's something I need to get to grips with. I'm not sure how much was deliberate and how much is sort of inadvertent things being caught. I mean, obviously there's economic benefits to tourism that we fully support. I guess we need to balance that with not ruining the very thing that people want to come to Monmouthshire for. So it's getting that balance right. But from very early discussions with the team, it does seem that the initial policy stance of support is perhaps hindered by some of the more detailed policies, and that could do with having a look at.
I think then there's an action. I'll move on to, I know Kelly wants to just follow up, but there's an action there for us, which is we will need a list of the LDP policies and where they tie together to come forward at a later committee in relation to this specifically. So that'll be an action for us. Kelly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think Mark's absolutely right. I mean, people come to Monmouthshire because the environment and the offer is very unique, but that obviously comes with some trade-offs and restrictions that sometimes we've had to make through planning or other policies. So the issue is always going to be about fine balance. I think, though, in terms of my experience of sometimes sitting in on planning committee and always coming to these committees, there could be something we could do around some joint training or some joint understanding of the issues, because I've sat in on several planning committee issues, for example, when we've changed designations around tourism to housing. So, for example, there's been a couple of hotels, which we clearly need. It's one of our biggest demands, and yet sometimes we're making decisions to convert hotel and tourism accommodation into housing. And housing's a priority as well, don't get me wrong. But again, it's just about understanding the relative benefits and the intended and unintended consequences of some of these decisions that we're making as a council. So I think that may be one thing for the committee to consider in the future. I think in terms of some of the other barriers that we've got, it is this lack clearly of serviced accommodation to keep visitors here, so they're spending larger amounts of money. And I think, Bob's just said to me now that the convention centre in Newport at the Celtic Manor has actually now got planning approval. That's going to be so significant, because the spillover into the hinterland for us in particular is going to be massive, and we've got to make sure that we're equipped and ready to respond to that demand. I think the other thing as well is probably about a joined up approach, not just between planning committee and this committee, but generally within the local authority, because there's lots of different divisions at the moment that all contribute to this, and we've got to try and bring those together much more holistically. But I think for me as well, the one thing that we probably lack, if I'm going to put my finger on it, in Monmouthshire, is that one big attractor. We don't have a Bluestone, do we? We don't have this, this entity, when you come over the bridge into Monmouthshire, what is it that sort of says, welcome to Wales, welcome to Monmouthshire? What is that big kind of destination attractor? What is it that makes us unique? If you were going to say, what is our tourism offer? It probably comes in many different parts and pieces at the moment, from castles to walking to recreation to food. It's massive, isn't it? But, what is the one thing that we could do to really attract people here? Now, that may not necessarily have to be a physical thing, because I know working right across South East Wales at the moment, when we're talking to other local authorities, they've got proposals, for example, to do up the Taff Trail to get more cyclists to come to South East Wales. Well, that's great. But if you just tart something up, does that necessarily mean you're going to get more people there? But if, for example, we all bid for the prelude to the Tour de France, you might get people coming back for kinds of repeat tourism because they've seen that on the TV. They want to cycle that route. Then they may take in the Taff Trail or something that we have in Monmouthshire. So I think this comes back to my point about the process being more joined up. Sometimes you need a major event or something to happen to create the exposure for an attraction. Then you need supportive policies to ensure that's maintained. Then you need to make sure that when people are coming back, there's things for them to do, places for them to go, places where they can eat. So, you know, it's that process that I think that we've got right that brings all of those different and moving parts together.
Okay. Is it worth us putting that last slide up, Nicola, which is in your presentation, just running through, because those are the identified issues, is that right? Or the recommended interventions, sorry. So we could look through those as a committee and see. Sorry, Councillor Hayward, did you?
I was just saying what Kelly said. It's an incredibly difficult thing. I've been on this committee for quite a few years, and we've been talking about increasing tourism, how important it is to Monmouthshire. We've been talking about increasing it for ages, and we've got to recognise, I think, that we can't say you will build a hotel here, you will do this, you will do that. Tourism grows by the public sector wanting to make money and invest in the county. It's interesting that 2012 was a bad year because, yes, we did have awful weather, but it was the year of the Ryder Cup when we were actually supposed to have a huge expansion in tourism. 2010, Ryder Cup, I say, I get mixed up. Good long as it goes that. But I think that we do have the attractions here in Monmouthshire. I think the Wye Valley brand is enough to bring people in here. And we're close to things like the Forest of Dean, and I know it's got a huge reputation for cycling. But I think Nicola's right. It's the hotel part that we need to get. We need to get more big hotels. And it's interesting that the report points out that the major hotels that are doing a lot of business are the Hilton down at Mega. But they're the ones on the main roads. Now, Newport has a lot of hotels. They've got a lot of hotels around the Calder roundabout. Now, I'm from Newport, and I know there's nothing special about the Calder roundabout. I mean, even the Celtic Manor, which is one of the most successful hotels, isn't in a particularly scenic spot. You've got power lines going everywhere, and you've got the M4. But I think Newport were far-sighted in allowing that large piece of woodland to be cut down and a hotel to be built on that site. And any other hotels sprung up around it. You've got the hotel opposite and a couple of hotels up the road there. And I don't know. It's incredibly difficult. And we as a council, we can't invest money in hotels. I mean, that's not our business. But I wonder if we could, in the local development plan, as Mark says, allocate space along the A449, which is our main arterial road going through the county, for development of a hotel complex or a hotel service area complex. Now, we have the service area on the turn off to Abergavenny, which wasn't very successful in the past. But if we allocated that land in the local development plan for hotels and servicing, that we could build up something that would encourage people to come in. We can't force developers to come in. We can't force them to spend their money here. But I think that hotel owners, if there was space available and that land was purely allocated for hotels, might look at it and see, is there an advantage? I mean, we all know that the Premier Inn has just gone through in Monmouth. Again, it's on that arterial road. Premier Inn obviously think that it's going to be a successful hotel. So perhaps instead of concentrating on the county, and instead of concentrating on what we're going to provide for people once they're here, just to concentrate on where we're going to put these hotels and say we will allocate in the next LDP 1,000 bed spaces, or that might be a bit too ambitious, but 800 bed spaces over the next 5 years. And they will all be along the A40, A449. And try and develop an area as Newport did at the Calder roundabout. I don't know whether it'll work or not, but we're not entrepreneurs. We've only got public money to spend, and it wouldn't be right that we spend it on hotels. But this is where I think the planning department could come into it by encouraging, and we need to be talking to the farmers now, saying, if that land became available, if you had permission for that, would you sell it? Would you make it available?
I think that's a really useful suggestion, and again, it's something we can add to this list of recommendations for something that comes forward from Mark's team to address some of these issues. So it's to look at how we can allocate land within the LDP for these planning purposes or these regeneration purposes around tourism. I'll come to Mark. I'll go to Kelly first, and then I've got Councillor Dovey and Councillor Wintle.
Thank you, Chair. I'll let Mark pick up on those specific planning issues. But just to come back on a point that Councillor Hayward made, really, which is quite significant, and forgive me, this is quite a provocational statement, but Councillor Hayward, you said that it isn't necessarily the business of councils to own, run and manage hotels. Why not? You know, Chairman, you asked earlier on, you said, you know, in terms of income, you know, have we seen thin end of the wedge, or are we there? And I'm just wondering about how much more potential that we've got to keep generating large-scale income. It needs to be significant. And many members have mentioned in the past, you know, why don't we have a commercial property portfolio? Why couldn't that include a hotel? Bob's just shown me something on Twitter. I think there was a tweet yesterday about the number of councils that actually have hotels who do run commercial operations. Is that something we should be looking to get into as a local authority?
Things like over my dead body come to mind, but I think I think it would be absolutely wrong for us to go and, particularly when we've looked at the capital outer, we can't even spend the money on schools, which the public needs, to try and build hotels and compete with the likes of Travelodge and Premier Inn. I think would be absolutely bonkers.
You'll be pleased to know then, Councillor Hayward, I think this will come up in the next meeting that we have, because we're looking at our investment portfolio and opportunities. So I go to Mark, and I've got Councillor Wintle and Councillor Dovey.
Thank you, Chair. The short answer to Councillor Hayward's question is yes, we can. The LDP is the council's document. It's the council's planning strategy. So if as a council you want certain things in it, then, you know, provided it meets with national planning policy and the overall strategy, then you can allocate as you wish. Linking back slightly to something Councillor Prosser asked earlier, he was sort of asking for a crystallised decision on, or comment on how and when. If we're talking about the next LDP, then ultimately the next LDP will be 2021 when the current one expires, so way off. However, in the meantime, we're required to do a full yearly review of the plan. And if the evidence says there's policies that aren't working, or some kind of shortfall in the plan, we can review it at that stage, either in whole or in part. Or if we were really feeling brave and we thought through the implications of doing it, we can voluntarily do a partial amend of the plan in a shorter timescale. So if the ultimate conclusion of this committee is that we think the tourism policies need looking at again, the council could choose to look at that section of the LDP again. There's some implications to that, which I think we'll need to go through in future meetings, but that is an option. One of the other things on the slide earlier, in terms of opportunities, one mentioned is developing SPG, so supplementary planning guidance, which is extra guidance that sits underneath the LDP. So that is something the team's already looking at and starting to think through. However, the only caveat is that guidance has to hang off the existing policies. So we can't undo an LDP policy or contradict it. So if the problem is the restrictive nature of some of the LDP policies, we need to look at it at that stage. We can't undo it with a bit of guidance underneath. But there's several options available. So as this work progresses, you know, the committee can look into which one's the best.
I've got two members that have indicated they want to speak, and then maybe we'll go back to those couple of slides just so Nicola and Ian can just give us an overview, because I think it was quite difficult to read some of those recommendations and issues. So if I go to Councillor Wintle, then Councillor Dovey, and Councillor White also. So.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's a few battles going to come with the LDPs, but I'm not going to go into it because it was a very sore, carbuncle, I think is a good word. But on the tourism side, we don't seem to signpost our accommodation. Like you've got the Lansdowne Fried along that back road. There's no signs at the Raglan roundabouts or the other Abergavenny side to direct people onto those roads to get to that area. And as I said, it's possibly, you know, you'd like to have the Hendry, the Rose come online. but again, you'd have to signpost that one because nobody knows where it is, except the golfers. And that, you know, and a lot of those seem to get lost on that back road. We see them quite regular, sort of going by several times looking for the rolls. So on that score, I think we ought to be emphasising our signing off the main roads and be like the Caldra. Thank you.
Any response to that from officers, or just no? Yeah, Nicola.
In terms of tourism signage, obviously there is a policy. It's usually up to individual businesses to apply for signage for their accommodation, and providing they meet the conditions of the tourism signage policy, and as long as those requests for signage are on roads that the council itself manages, those decisions can be made in-house by the council, and they are. There are quite high costs to tourism signage, which sometimes the business decides they don't want to invest in for a particular reason, you know, usually the cost. Sometimes it's roads not in our control, that decision is made with Welsh Government and the application is refused. The other thing, I'm just trying to think what the other thing was. There was one other thing. What we don't want, I think what we need to be very aware of is that this is a stunningly beautiful county, and the last thing that we want is to clutter it up with a whole load of signage that is often becomes out of date, and we don't always have the resources then to take down signage which is no longer relevant. We also, within our policy the signage policy that was approved by members, we don't include the name of the business, just a hotel sign with a bed. So whereas in other council areas, they've made different decisions to include the name of the hotel or the business.
Yeah, but aren't we missing a trick? You know, I know that the Welsh Tourism things wants to send everything to the west and pass through Monmouthshire. You know, so somehow we've got to divert some of those people. You know, so I agree. It's the Assembly's road, but surely it's part of the Welsh tourism that they should be bending a bit towards us for a change.
Ian, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a well-made point. However, there is an awful lot of marketing that goes on externally for individual hotels, and obviously online presence is a massive area of growth. I think the whole digital side of it is something that Nicola's working with the different partners we've got, and the Visit Monmouthshire website obviously does really signpost all people to where the directions are, where the hotels are. So I take the point on better local directions for local people, but I guess we're encouraging people from outside the county to get to hotels where they probably have made those arrangements and travel decisions before they've left their home.
Can I just add one more point? Even our highways people are not helping you. There's a sign on the Monastow Road roundabout, which is just pointing down Monastow Road, not getting the people that's coming off the dual carriageway looking for campsites, and which is on the sign, and again for the rolls, but it's pointing down because some person, as a cyclist thing, moved the sign and didn't take any notice.
All right. I'll take Councillor Dovey, then Councillor White, and then, as I mentioned, I wanted to take it back to those specific planning issues, so linking it into Mark's department and how we can take some of these issues forward that we're raising now. So, Councillor Dovey.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and can I apologise for being late? I did leave a message. I hope you got it. Thank you. One of the things I'm conscious of is that our biggest market, if you like, for people visiting the county is very close to us. It's the Midlands, basically the Midlands, and we're within an easy day's trip for them to get to the valley, tour through it, if you like, or indeed come to one place. And I wonder whether we do make enough of saying to that market, particularly that area, what there is to offer in Monmouthshire in general. One of the ways people can get here, of course, is by coaches on one-day trips. And we really do miss a trick, because I've try and speak to the drivers of coaches when they do come and stop in Chepstow. What brings them to the town? And in many cases, they will put the people off nowhere near the tourist interesting part. They'll put them off by a cafe, say somewhere near Nelson Street, leave them there for an hour and a half while they drive off and park up and have a cigarette or a sandwich or whatever, and they come back and they pick them up and they take them away. That is absolute nonsense. So I've spoken to a lot of them, and they say the way you need to get people, get these coach operators to do a tour of the Wye Valley and stop in Chepstow and whatnot, is actually contact them. They get lobbied all the time. And if we've abandoned the coaches in Monmouthshire. I mean, we had a planning application this week where coaches, Councillor Hayward raised the point with the new hotel that's going into Monmouth, and the coaches thing wasn't thought through terribly well at all. And if you drive through the Wye Valley now, you find it difficult even to find a place for a coach to stop. You know, we are not thinking about those sort of issues. And in fact, I've read this thing through a couple of times now, and if coach tourism doesn't seem to feature in it, if it does, I'm missing it constantly. So I think that is a problem. What Kelly says is right. We don't have a single big thing, but we do have an important thing. For instance, in Chepstow, Walker's Welcome, and that is the coastal walk. It starts in Chepstow. You could almost make a town like Chepstow, which is always called the gateway to Monmouthshire and all that sort of thing. You could almost make Chepstow, if you wanted, the big attraction to start you know, get a taste of whatever it is of Monmouthshire, because you've got so much around Chepstow. You've got Tintern Abbey just up the road. You've got the second oldest stone built castle and whatever that was first completed in the UK after the Norman Conquest. You could put together a package to make Chepstow a town as a taster and an attraction. And I'm not saying that, I'm not favouring Chepstow, I'm just trying to come up with an idea of how you get round the, we haven't got a big single offer. One of the other things I think we can do, and we've spoken to it through the rail group as well, is that you can work with the trains. The franchise people are quite happy to talk to the county about having advertising on their trains, and you could talk to them about special weekend day fairs and that sort of thing. And I don't know whether anybody's tried that, but the contact points can be available through us. And the hotels thing is a problem. I mean, in Chepstow, we do have a problem with the hotels. The problem is, so many of them, like the Abbey Hotel in Tintern, is going for housing, supposedly. That was an absolute disgrace that happened. And now it's left derelict there, which actually destroying one of the key places in the valley that people want to visit. In the middle of it, there is an old deteriorating building with the grass not cut. It looks awful. But the hotel industry is in real problems. I mean, it is very difficult for the established hotels to stay open. They have a real problem with profitability. To bring their hotels up to the specifications that perhaps we want to attract more people. So that is a conundrum, and I don't know how we can help with that or get around it. But there are some ways we could bring more to the county, and I do agree that it could be signed. If you include advertising and other things as well, it could be signed better than it is at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dovey. Is there any response to that, or just to note, I think Councillor Greenland wants to respond, if I can go to him first and then...
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this has been a really good debate, and I've heard some excellent contributions from members, and I've been taking notes, and I will be following those up, because I think there are some excellent ideas coming out of that. The truth is that we will get hotels to open in Monmouthshire if they can see that there's a commercial opportunity for them. If they don't perceive there's a commercial opportunity, they won't come. And with the convention centre that is now definitely going ahead at the Celtic Manor, that is a convention centre for conferences. I think it's up to 7,000 people. And they've got something like 500 bed spaces within that hotel. A lot of the people who go to those conferences will be staying. There's a huge opportunity for a commercial development around Monmouthshire based on the opportunities from that convention centre. And our job is actually to promote that as a commercial opportunity to people who want to move into the area. In terms of, Councillor Dovey mentioned the issues of coaches, and one of the things that we most specifically did with the Portal Road development was to retain a piece of land for coach parking, because we recognise the problems in Monmouth that there is nowhere that coaches can lay up while they take while the visitors go around the town. So we have kept a piece of ground specifically for that purpose, so that we can bring coaches into Monmouth. But we've got similar problems elsewhere, and we need to find ways through. For a number of years, we've been looking at particular sites which we've never been able to finally get across the line for hotels. And the one that I'm particularly thinking about is Piercefield House on the racecourse at Chepstow. So clearly there is an opportunity there for a hotel, and a very smart hotel development. And if you get a smart boutique development, which is bringing a high standard, people will go to that simply because it provides a good standard of accommodation and a venue that they can enjoy themselves. And if you put it in an area like Monmouthshire as well, then you have got a winner. And just to be even more provocative on the issue of running hotels, what I've picked up was that there are 174 hotels in the UK which are run by local authorities. Now, it is not our business, and we don't have the expertise to run a hotel. But we do have the expertise to put together deals and possibly partnerships that can make those hotels happen. And there are a number of ways that we could do that. And we are about income generation. And I do believe that through various different types of partnerships, there is the opportunity for Monmouthshire to gain in the number of beds. And we would be facilitating those. We need to take those opportunities forward.
And what we have here today is the two departments that are going to help us do that. I think, you know, we've got the planning system which will hopefully be able to support these opportunities, and then obviously Tourism Leisure, who have the expertise in being able to market the offer we have here to provide those commercial opportunities to be attracted here. But I'll move to Councillor White, and then, as I mentioned, we'll go back to that report if that's okay, and then follow up again with any member questions around what specifically we can do with these two departments today in terms of taking forward the issues that are being identified. So, Councillor White.
Thank you, Chairman. I won't take up too much time telling you what a wonderful historic town Monmouth is, and we are on the borders of Gloucester and Hereford, so we've always thought we were the gateway to Wales, but that's another debate. Can I please take you back to the camping sites? We have a few around Monmouth, and they're very well occupied during the seasons. Now that our seasons are changing and the winters are getting far milder, why can't we have some of them open? I have people who camp who come to the museum where I do voluntary curating, and they say they would love to come all year, and they don't understand why they can't. And when you explain the expense of dismounting the whatever they have there on site that they have to take down and put away, I mean, that takes an awful lot out of the profit of the season, I would have thought, wear and tear also. And employing someone to be on site all year round, that would be an asset, that would help with the employment numbers. We have a site in Monmouth that started off that way, but now they are allowed to stay open all year. So I know it can happen. My question is, why can't we help it to happen more? Because people do come to the towns that are historic, and they do love to travel around, and they love to have their own base. Not everyone can afford hotels, luxury B&Bs, etc. And we do get a lot of people camping. I would like to see this this issue looked at a little more clearly. Thank you.
I think that's, you know, a really important point, and it's something that's been flagged up that we need to bring forward to look at the planning policy in more detail, and that's what needs to come forward as part of a further review to understand why that's not the case. I mean, is there any immediate response to that from officers here, or is it something we need to... Kelly?
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that Councillor White has said. One of the things that I think we're really keen to explore is the extent to which we can use some of our own land holdings and some of our own attractions for camping. So, for example, we talked about the significance and the natural beauty of the Wye Valley. Well, we've got Old Station Tintern, you know, that comes with quite some significant land. You know, could perhaps we look at that in a different way? And I think increasingly now, as the focus will be on income generation, it's about leveraging and optimising some of our assets. So we are actively considering some of these options and opportunities.
Should we just go back then to those couple of slides and just be clear now today what our purpose is in terms of how we're going to take this forward? We've had some really useful suggestions and debate around this, and recommendations that will come forward for a later committee meeting, where hopefully Mark can come and present to us on addressing some of the issues that have been rightly raised today. Is there anything further we need to just look through in terms of that list? Because it's very difficult for us to see, so maybe if we could just briefly go through the issues that we need to look at and to take forward.
Okay, these issues were those that were identified in the reports. They're all in there, but I'll go through them just briefly. There no specific permissive hotel policy or supplementary planning guidance which articulates what the council would like to see and where. And this makes it particularly difficult for investors who are interested in developing a particular accommodation establishment somewhere to know where outside settlements they would be allowed to develop the sort of accommodation that they're looking for. Whereas if we had something that clearly articulated that, it would be much easier, and I think we'd have more people coming forward to say, you know, wanting to take advantage of those opportunities. As we've already discussed, the fact that we've got no hotel retention policy allowed us to lose a hotel on a really key tourism site, the Abbey Hotel in Tintern. And as Councillor Dovey pointed out, that site looks a mess at the moment, and it's putting off visitors to that part of the county, which is probably the jewel in our crown. That used to be our honeypot area. So really, really sad that we've lost that, and we need to prevent that sort of thing happening again. Is that right? Okay. And then there's a few different types of visitor accommodation development that are just not covered within the current LDP. So holiday parks, static caravans, holiday lodge parks, luxury camping, not specifically mentioned, as Mark has already mentioned. Camping pods and wooden tents not covered. Warden accommodation.
On the camping sites, I think the biggest part of the problems is toilet and showering facilities. And I know 2 weeks ago down Caldicott that it was a well-attended event with a lot of campers. And luckily, the football club down there opened up their facilities for people to shower and use their toilets. So I think we have to concentrate on that as well. And that would encourage a lot more people in.
Definitely, it's about having those ancillary facilities and things that make people want to consider camping, because without those, people just don't see it as a very attractive proposition. So warden accommodation is often not permitted, and that's a problem, sometimes for security of sites and for dealing with any issues, and lots of people will only stay in sites where there is a warden on site to sort out any issues of noise or anything like that. No reference to the provision of amenities on caravan and self-catering complex sites to help extend the season. So things that operators can do to put on events to help extend that season. So we're back to the real seasonality of our tourism industry. Pub accommodation isn't mentioned, and for us, with food and drink being such a strength for us, and so many of our rural pubs struggling to remain viable, this is a really key one. And something that would really fit with our marketing message. There's huge opportunities for this, but we're just not in providing the right environment for many of the pub accommodation operators to consider it, and we need to make it easier for them to do so. The PGL style residential activity centres are not covered, and that's something that perhaps could be considered for some of our sites like Hillston, that type of future for them. But it's difficult to know how we would progress those types of developments with the current planning policy framework. The specific issues about small numbers of lodges associated with activities, particularly fishing lodges not covered if they're built off-site, and as we've already mentioned about the seasonal occupancy conditions, which can restrict the commercial viability and the ability of the owners to extend the season and respond to market demand for off-peak stays. So those were the key things that were identified within the report.
So quite a long list of issues there. The question now is how we're going to address those to meet the objectives that all of us are pretty much signed up to, well, all of us are signed up to in terms of the importance of our tourism industry and the deficits, if you like, within our quality of accommodation that's available. So how are we going to take that forward then? Is there any issues identified by you as a directorate that you would like to see planning pursue now? Would you like to see us bring this forward back as an agenda item? I think we'd all be keen to do that. Yeah,
I think it's important for Mark to, obviously he's very new into post and it's quite a big challenge put in front of you straight away, but obviously we're going to work really closely together with Kelly and Pete Davis and Deb Hill-Howells. We've got probably the right people there to really get a grip of this and bring it together. It's been fabulous for me anyway to note the enthusiasm and also the how much opportunity we have got across Monmouthshire when you put the whole package together. we're clearly, if we get this right, we're going to really make a massive difference to those steam figures. So I think clearly it's early days in the discussion, but obviously from your point of view, it's getting understanding, a bit more understanding and a bit more time, isn't it, just to clarify issues.
Yeah, I think, Chair, as a starting point for the next meeting, if I can set out a bit of a summary of the existing policies and how they link, and perhaps link it back to this list to say what is covered and what isn't covered. I guess just as a quick caveat at this stage, I would say my initial view is not necessarily a problem that there isn't a specific policy mentioning each and every one of these things, because over the next few years, as the LDP is in place, there could be new kinds of tourism coming in that we haven't really thought of at this stage. So I don't think we want to become fixated on having a policy for each specific activity we can think of at the moment. It's more making sure our policies don't either consciously or inadvertently restrict some of the things that we want to encourage or enable. So if I provide that list of the current policies and a summary against this list of what is and isn't covered at the moment, and that sounds like a clear starting point for our discussions.
Yeah, I think to give you time in that, rather than bringing it to the July meeting, we maybe suggest coming that to September. Obviously, we don't have a meeting in August. But I know that Nicola's got a list of interventions which you've suggested that we need to be doing. And perhaps we could bring that forward as a paper in terms of what actions or progress are being made against those interventions, where you think there are still gaps. So you could work together on an agenda item for this to come forward in September. Do members think that would be a useful way forward?
Yeah. Yes, Chair, I agree. I mean, we've raised the temperature here today and enthusiasm, hopefully, and we need to look at the end games, basically. So I wouldn't look forward to receiving loads of steam figures at the next meeting. I'd be looking forward to what are we actually doing to get to the end result, and if we can't do it, say we can't do it, and we concentrate on something else, in that sense. But it'd be good to have positive responses next time on your progress, really, in the action areas. Forget all the other bits. Just do the action bits. Let's get some quick wins. Let's see where we can improve it.
A very fair point, and I think that goes back to the interventions list. Let's look at action against that list and see what's happening and see specifically what the issues are in relation to existing planning policy. Ian, and then if there's any members for further questions. Ian, did you want to follow up?
Yeah, it's only to say one of capacity, and it's an issue for myself and Kelly, really, on the size of the tourism team, which has been depleted over the years, and obviously this is such an important topic to get right. But it is, it's Nicola and another basically doing a lot of the leg work on this, and I think Kelly and myself have got a lot of work to do to create the right environment, and working with other colleagues to make sure there is capacity in the team and the unit to really drive this agenda forward, because we see how important it is. 173 million, I think, back into the economy. So we've really got to prioritise and make sure that the capacity is there as well in the directorate.
Yeah, and I think, in terms of the paper that comes back to us, we're not asking for huge reams of information. We're just asking for some progress against those interventions and where you feel, like Councillor Prosser said, is it going to be a go? Is it not going to be something we can pursue? So just have some clarity on that would be helpful. Kelly?
Yeah, just to pick up on that point, Chair, if I could, because I was going to mention it earlier, and it's not that we're bleating that our tourism team only contains 2 people. But again, I think it's the help that we really need from members in terms of promoting and cultivating this enterprise mindset, because we can bleat and we can say our tourism team is 2 people, or we can think about the business community and the contribution they make to our tourism team. We can think of planning as part of our tourism team, museums as part of our tourism team, events. They all kind of seeg and blend together. So when we talk about our tourism presence, we've really got to be careful not just to focus on the people who've got tourism in their titles, and think about everybody who is able and capable of making a contribution to the agenda, because it does cross-cut. So we really need your help to get as many people thinking as imaginatively as possible about how we really bring together a collective effort to get behind this.
Councillor Winton?
I totally agree with what Kelly's saying there. But we've also got to think with the planning department, talking to NRW especially. There's an instance in Monmouth where a canoe centre who works nearly all the year round, but it's got attempted to have a campsite for people on canoes because there's not many places to land. And then it went through planning, against planning advice, and then all of a sudden it's called in by the Assembly. Now then, where's the sense? It's tourism. Nobody's going to plant a tent when they're going to get flooded. There's a public footpath goes past the front of it. You know, in Monmouth we get about a day's notice of the river rising. So you know, you're not going to, if it is rising, jump in the canoe and get off from there. You know, that's some common sense.
I think that's a really important point, that sometimes we're actually at the behest of other stakeholder organisations like MRW. Potentially Welsh Government, as a planning bill comes forward, because that's going to change the perspective on things. And there's an issue here that we need to understand where stakeholders impact on our activity, and then it's a role for the Cabinet member to lobby Welsh Government or whoever the stakeholder is to try and change policy at that level on our behalf. So I think that's something we definitely need to be mindful of and maybe address as part of this review. Nicola?
I just wanted to come back on your point, Councillor Duffy, about the coaches and reassure you that we are actually working really closely with coach tour operators and group tour operators. We had 2 fam trips in April taking coach tour operators and tour operators around attractions in Monmouthshire, and we make those links and have those conversations with them all of the time. So you know, please don't think that we're not doing anything.
Perhaps it would have been a nice idea if when you took them around, these coach operators could meet some of the people that you could pluck out from the Chamber of Commerce so that they were convinced about the sort of business people that were on the end and would make their customers really very welcome. Can I make one other point, Chairman? Otherwise it'll go out of my head. The way we going back to this, not having a single place, you know, like as we spoke about earlier, the one big thing. Could we, and I know we'd go the way to a degree, but with our advertising, could we go with the hub towns, as Councillor White was determined to say, in case I was getting away with something, could we have an emphasis in our advertising about the benefits of the attractions that there are if you visit Monmouth, if you visit Chepstow? So this is the town, this is where it's situated, and the general thing, and then bang, 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 the things that you can see. So people know that they can come and have a good day there, or maybe stay a weekend. So you're selling the destination in its entirety. You say it's placed here in the beautiful south of the Wye Valley, one of 2 entrances to Monmouthshire, gateways, and you could do that. But as well as that, you can be selling the things that are there, and make it a really hard sell. So it's just more emphasis. Be a bit more clever. Give them the extra reasons to come. All right, you've got the scenery and everything else, but you've got all this history or whatever it is as well. I mean, some people would be really interested in the fact that the pop group Queen, which is one of my favourite things to do in the car when I'm on my own. Steffi won't let me do it in the house. Is listen to this at full chat. But they recorded in Rockville Studios their first Rhapsody. You know, it paints a picture. It makes it interesting. Nelson and Queen in the same town. Can you imagine that? He'd boogie on down to that, all right, wouldn't he? That's me.
Thank you, Councillor Devi. Councillor Prosser.
Yes, I'm pleased you're doing a review on the coaching, because I'm actually trying to get something amended. In the Abergavenny bus station, there's a sign that it says overnight coaches can't park, but articulated lorries and refrigerated lorries can. And so if you've got foreign tourists coming in, coach drivers have got nowhere to put their coach. Okay, you can argue possibly you can use King Henry School or whatever, but that's not the thing. It's not user-friendly, and I've had a coach driver pointed out to me, he said, we can't park here overnight. I said, why not? It's a bus station, and it's not used for any other reason overnight. And so I'm trying to get that amended. I'm glad you've got that initiative ongoing.
Councillor Evans.
I'm impressed that you had them tolls with the buses companies. But how far afield do you go to let these bus companies know what we have got down in Monmouthshire? So, you know, because if they're leaving London, that area of Manchester, it's a long way down if they're going down to West Wales. They want to stop off. So are they, do these people, bus companies, know what we got in Monmouthshire?
We produce a publication that targets our coach operators and travel agents particularly. So anybody thinking of bringing groups in or independent travellers who are coming in as groups. So we've got a publication that's targeted to them. We've also got a specific website for the whole of South East Wales that targets those people. We had a meeting, a series of one-to-one meetings with, I think it was 30 travel agents and tour operators at Caerphilly Castle back in March, I believe it was. And at that we met with tour operators, big ones like Thompson's. There were small coach companies looking to develop bespoke itineraries. We had one-to-one meetings with about 30 operators from all over the UK and overseas. They were all really impressed with what we told them about Monmouthshire. We are waiting for details of the impact of that to see what product we've managed to get onto their itineraries as a result. But a lot of it is working with them to understand what themes they're working on, what's of interest to visitors. Food is always a huge one. People are really interested in food. They want to know where their food is grown, how it's processed, all those sorts of things. Also very interested in history. There are numerous things they're interested in, gardens, and as we've already mentioned, our challenge really in Monmouthshire is that we've got so much and such a diverse range of product, and that we don't have one specific thing. But that also presents an opportunity in that because of that, we're able to get different experiences onto a number of different operators' itineraries who are dealing with lots of different themes. So it is an opportunity for us. And as I say, when we know what experiences we've managed to get onto those itineraries, I will feed that back. But it is such a competitive industry, and we're up against, you know, some really big destinations when we do things like that. But I think we hold our own, and we're certainly taking part in those conversations, and we're in you know, communication with those operators, and we send e-newsletters out through our South East Wales Consortium, which includes latest news and products and experiences coming online. So we're always talking to them, and we're always giving them reasons. Just because it isn't visible, it doesn't mean we're not doing it. Mostly it's being done electronically, although we do have meetings with them, and we do bring them into the area on things like fam trips.
Okay.
Come back in it.
Yes,
Perhaps then it would be nice if you could direct them to Caldicot Castle, because we got the experience, and that's a third gateway to Wales.
We absolutely do. Okay, thank you, members. That's a really good debate. I'm going to try and summarise as best I can, because there's a lot of really useful points there, and I'm keen that they're captured as part of the summarisation in the minutes. We spoke briefly about the quality of feedback, and you mentioned that there certainly are people going outside of the county when they come here for events. And we're keen to see that comparative with neighbouring authorities when the STEAM data comes forward for all others, perhaps just as a paper update to us at some point. Councillor Prosser spoke about if we want to double, for example, our tourism numbers, what barriers do we face and what we're going to do to remove those barriers, and brought us back to that at the end of the discussion as well, asking for action against what our progress potentially could be. Councillor Hayward spoke about the hotel issue and about the potential to allocate land within the LDP to allow specific sites for tourism development within the county. Councillor Wintle mentioned the issue around signage and signposting of accommodation and how that can be addressed through our own signage policy. Councillor Dovey spoke about tour operators and coaches and made the very valid point around linking into them and whether or not we're taking a proactive approach with tour operators and coach companies. Are we doing enough in that area? Just to mention, the Cabinet member spoke about the commercial opportunities for developers to be attracted to the county and how we can promote those commercial opportunities such as convention centres down the road in Newport. Councillor White spoke about camping sites and the issues around not being able to access those all year round. And similarly, Councillor Evans spoke about the facilities on camping sites and how they could be improved to encourage people to attend them or to visit them. And then Councillor Dovey once more spoke about the advertising and the emphasis on the benefits of selling our destination in its entirety with other areas. And I think I pretty much covered everything. Councillor Evans as well spoke about bus companies and how we can link in with them. So in terms of actually actions going forward, we've agreed that, well, firstly in July there's going to be an agenda item on investment property, so that links in somewhat to this agenda item. But specifically in the September meeting, we'll have a summary of existing policies where they're relevant that link back to these issues. Maybe we could look at those potential LDP allocations, potential sites within the LDP we could look at in the future. And also, we'd like to see some action against the list of interventions that was raised today. We're not asking for an exhaustive list to come back. We're just asking for some updates against those interventions and where you think we can pursue them in more detail, working with the planning department. Does that pretty much cover it, everyone? Is there anything you think I've missed there or we need to follow up further? Because that was pretty intensive session there, which we've looked at. So, is that okay?
Excellent summary, Madam Chairman. If I may say.
To whistle through that. Okay, brilliant. So, officers, are you content with that approach? And that okay for you? Okay, if you wouldn't mind just staying with us, actually, officers and Cabinet member, just to look at the work programme. So just for 2 minutes, if that's okay. And we were going to have a special meeting in June, but I don't think the items that were going to come forward to that meeting are going to be available. So we're now looking at having our standard meeting on the 23rd of July and a special meeting before that, earlier in the month of July. I'll let Hazel just run us through that, if that's okay.
Yes, Chair. As discussed previously in the meeting, the Cultural Services Review is not going to be ready to have a special in June, and I don't believe in July. So the proposal for that meeting would be to take that item to the 3rd of September meeting, along with the Chief Officer annual report. So that would leave us having our next regular meeting would be the 23rd of July. We've got the Community Infrastructure Levy, we've got the investment property that we've talked about today, and we've got the improvement plan, which is part of your statutory performance role. But we were thinking of having a special meeting mid-July to bring back the event strategy, but also to bring back the return on investment of cycling after committee asked for a further brief paper, just outlining the key aspects there. So I've got a couple of dates for you to have this special meeting mid-July. And the reason we've asked the officers to stay as well is if they've got problems with those dates, it would be really helpful if we could sort of agree them now and see if we can find a date that suits. So with your regular meeting being on the 23rd of July, I was thinking perhaps of trying to go for the following week, which would be the 28th or the 29th. But I don't know if that's too close to sort of school holidays for members, or whether you'd rather meet sort of more around the 14th of July. Is there a preference in terms of weeks? And then I can sort of give you some specific dates free in the council diary. Wednesday the 29th is clear in the morning or the afternoon. And then the Tuesday the 28th is clear in the afternoon. Or you've got the 14th of July, which is the morning or afternoon. But could I ask for some guidance on Ian as to, because these 2 items really depend on when they can be ready and available. Yeah, so 28th or 29th, what's the preference? 29th. A morning meeting? Okay.
29th, pre-meeting 9:30, meeting start at 10.
Yeah, there's only other one thing to mention, Chair, which isn't on the work programme, but for you to be aware, the Strong Community Select Committee, they asked to scrutinise the solar farm business case, and I believe this committee also had an interest in that. We'd scheduled for that item to go to Strong Communities next week on the 11th of June, and I was going to remind you today that meeting you can attend and you would be invited to, but unfortunately the report will now not be on the agenda of that meeting. So as and when that report is available and ready to go to scrutiny, we'll make sure that this committee is invited to attend the same meeting. So it'll be a Strong Communities meeting, or we might have to set up a special meeting, but you will be invited so that you can jointly scrutinise it. So no need to go next week on the 11th.
Okay, members, is that okay with everyone? Is everyone clear on where our next meeting is? So our next meeting will be the 23rd of July at the standard time of 10 o'clock, and then we'll have the special meeting on the 29th of July. Yeah, we haven't got the Cabinet Planner in front of us today, so that will need to be sent to you separately. If anyone's got any issues in terms of what they want to see brought forward, please let us know as soon as you get the opportunity to do so, and we'll follow that up. Okay? If there's no other business from anyone, then thank you very much to officers and to members. Oh.
Section 106.
Oh, sorry, yes, Hazel just reminded me, the Section 106, appointing a member.
Councillor Eason reminded me that the Section 106 working group, which was an officer working group, it was a recommendation of this committee that we actually appoint a member to sit on the Section 106 working group. It doesn't have to be a member of this committee, it could be another member. Councillor Eason hasn't put himself forward. I'm not sure if he wishes to do so or if anybody here wishes to do so. Failing that, I've got a consideration from a member who's on another committee that I could suggest to you. But first of all, would anybody from this committee wish to do that?
Any interest from members? David? Councillor Evans? Brilliant. Okay, so we've got Councillor Evans selected to that. That's it. Thank you very much to members and to officers. Enjoy the rest of your day.